but I do like how well they've integrated it though. Zoom and YouTube is a good integration. And we are live to the world. But I do like how well they've integrated it though.
You've got some sound coming in the background there, I think, Rob.
You're not fat, it's the shirt. So, did you know that you can get...
Sorry.
All right, take two on this segment, I suppose.
Here, hang on.
Better.
We are at midnight. It is May 27th. We are into our...
I think we've had 17 segments, Rob. This will be our
17th
17th segment, I
I
think.
can't do Day of the Swan dots math. Dots is the acronym for Day of the Swan. It's got a lovely acronym. I try not to use it because I hang around people like Jill and Venus Flytrap and Sean, who says the brand, you can't create acronyms unless someone authorizes the acronyms. I gave up on stopping GSG from existing. GSG, if anyone in the Grey Swan Guild hears the term GSG, that's Grey Swan Guild as an acronym, it means something commercial is going on, and I'm okay with it.
Excellent.
Secrets of the Grey Swan Guild.
I thought for late in the game, there's something that we've been doing 29 times already that seems to be working. Gordon has been, I think, on nearly every one of them. So I'm glad you've appeared, Gordon, because we've got this thing called the craft building series that we've been doing. And I personally really enjoy it. It kind of climbs behind kind of the what we do, and it gets after the, well, how do we actually go about doing it? And sometimes we even tackle the why. And so we've been doing these alphabetically, A to B to C to D. We're into the E's. And I thought, at least for 1 hour of our 24 that we're doing the Day of the Swan, that we might be able to focus on one of the E's. And so I thought experimentation and the power of doing. We talk about being a think tank and a do tank. And I thought we might be able to spend some time together talking about the craft of experimentation. You all game?
Indeed.
Let's
do it. Let's do it. I love it. I like the spirit. It's the late night crew. We are experimenters just by virtue of being so committed to the cause here. So as mentioned, just for those listening, we have implemented an event series that we do once every at least 2 weeks. Usually it's about once a week in different media. And it mines all of the things that we do well in the Guild: futures and intelligence and sense making and thinking and history and change and innovation and science and impact and technology. We have such a wide berth. And so I think when it comes to experimentation, quite a few of these areas are benefited by that. From a craft building standpoint, I'm a big fan of Ernest Hemingway. We are all apprentices in a craft where no one ever becomes a master. And so I think it's with that same spirit we'll tackle today's conversation. We usually have a bit of a formula. Sometimes we don't tell people on Clubhouse when we do it that we have a formula, but we kind of know how to do these right now, don't we, Gordon?
Yeah, it tends to flow. And sometimes we reverse an order of something, but we typically hit all those points. Yeah.
And I love the fact Nathan, who is also one of our regulars, is flooding into the chat now too. So let's get after it. And we want to talk about experimentation. We usually start off with a quote on these things. William Blake, the true method of knowledge is experiment. And I am inclined to agree with him. I think, I find it's one thing to think about something deeply. It's another thing to actually go do something, see what happened, and learn from the experience. I'm not too sure if you guys philosophically agree with that, but I think this notion of doing has some benefits for our thinking as well. Like, we think by the fact that we do. It's probably one of the real problems that we have with our schools and the way we learn conventionally, that there's less doing involved and more conventional thinking. As always, we usually start our sessions with good news. Lego has had its own experimentation. So it's looking at its first brick prototypes made of recycled plastic. And so they've gone through obviously it's your core product. It needs to have integrity. And so they've had a set of different kind of clutch strength and smash testing that has gone through one set of tests. And so my hope is Lego will be soon launching, recycled brick prototypes. My hope is they'll also include the fact that when you step on one of these things, hopefully they won't be so agonizing in the future too. My hope is, they'll knock down both those 2 bowling pins in the same throw. So some opening perspectives. We usually in these sessions go around and just get some opening perspectives on what people think about experimentation. I'll go off screen in a minute. I find one of the things I face constantly when it comes to experimentation is, how startups approach this versus how corporations approach this. And I think in general, and this is kind of an interesting decision tree map where, it profiles if people are coming out of school, where are you most likely to end up? And I do find that the experimenters tend to want to aggregate to startups, and the people that are very sure about something and then just commit at that point are the ones that end up in corporations. And so it's something as an innovation piece that is always a challenge in terms of working with large companies. It's like, how certain do you need to be, and how much do you respect the experimentation results as opposed to this is what your CEO thought or something? I think startups are quite, I'll give them benefit. I don't always give startups benefit, but I think they're much more pure about experimentation and living by the results. I'm going to go off screen and get some opening perspectives from people here. What's Gordon, you've come to us, you're used to it. I usually pivot to you first or second. What's your thoughts on experimentation and the power of doing?
I drift naturally to something we've talked about in just little snippets over the years. Never really had a chance to, over a coffee or a stronger beverage, elaborate on with each other. And that is the ideas of agility. And for me, the ideas of agility around 2-way doors that I can open, I can go through. And if I don't like what I'm getting, or I want to try something different, I can go back through that door. And the cost and the impact to me of that is minimal compared to having to think and plan and articulate and write proposals until we're sick of it, to try and convince everyone in consensus that we should build a 1-way door. That whole philosophy of 2-way doors is really the thing that comes to my mind. And is the part that I get to practice most in my work. And we were talking metaphors in one of the earlier hours. I can't remember which one at this point, but I think it was Louise. But the metaphor I have is you go out on the concrete floor in what might be a pole barn, and you build all kinds of really cheap, breakable 2-way doors on the concrete floor, and you test and you improvise and you figure out what works. And then you call in the construction crew and you build the proper facility and the finished carpenters to build a wonderful mahogany 1-way door and the herringbone wooden floor. Yeah, you're tearing up, I see. That's what comes to my mind. Sorry, it's after midnight, so I'll use 1,000 words when 4 would do. After midnight, I'll use 2,000.
It's good. Long conversations after midnight. Those are good ones sometimes. I like it. Nathan, you're coming to us with this very
I'm totally
it's
lost.
either an ominous mood or a romantic mood. I'm not too sure, but you've got good lighting going on. What's your thoughts about experimentation?
I got something for you, Sean.
Yeah.
It's a book. Oh, I've got my
I
copy
like
on my
it.
desk over here. Consilience,
Yeah.
E.O. Wilson, my favorite bug doctor.
They things get mentioned a few times. At some point, you got to go find out what they are.
Good. That's a good one.
I love it.
He's very poetic.
Well, good. It looks like it's going to be fun. It joins a stack with some serious throw weight and height and depth and width.
Nice.
This automatic disappearing background is not a good thing for showing.
No, it's a book.
I know.
It's a book. Zoom.
Zoom is certain that it's part of the background.
Yeah.
You know, it's
I've got an old copy of On Human Nature, which is his
I would
first
not like to
pass
have a
from
book
ants.
like I would not like to have a book like Complexion. Then I would be lost entirely on Zoom. They would never show my face. So Nathan,
I was wondering
on
if I
point.
could match my shirt to the background and maybe disappear a little bit. What's the point again? Doors and pole barns. I do understand pole barns. I've made pole barns. I know about those. Sorry, one of my tricks is to.
I'm going to channel your grade 4
I
here.
do two things here that you might not have experienced before. One is I will take metaphors literally and see where that goes. And then the other thing that that this one's just for fun. When somebody is being very profane, I will listen to their words and reinterpret those literally. And that can be very amusing. No, I will not give you an example.
Okay.
Thank you.
You want to stick that where the sun doesn't shine? You mean that?
Yeah, that's precisely the one I was thinking of.
Oh, that is a good tactic to get back at people. I think we could have learned that for one of Lauren's lectures from earlier today.
I actually had suggested the head up the ass image that's popped into my head. That there are many cartoons of that.
All right, Rob, experimentation and the power of doing. We've invented this guild thing, and we've talked about the power of doing in the guild. We just can't be a salon conversation that just thinks about these things. We actually like to go out and do stuff. What's your opening perspective?
I have a renewed interest in experimentation, and I'm running lots of projects that have different degrees of uncertainty. I have come upon the basic concept that we should use experiments and the scientific principles when things are very uncertain. The more uncertain that we agree they are, the more likely we should go back to grade 10 biology, create a hypothesis, create an apparatus, a method, draw a conclusion, prove or disprove our hypothesis using, fancy dancy logic. And in software areas in business, I am amazed that people do not understand the uncertainty that's in front of them. They think because software works, all software should work. And that's just not the truth.
Well, but it should.
It should. Well, I played Fortnite last night with my kids and it's got like 0 response time.
I would have given software companies a passing grade in experimentation, Rob. When you think about the number of engineers that run software companies, I would have thought they, versus other industries, they might have got a better grade than you're giving them.
The only time that in software that I have actually run through the experimental process, the scientific Western process, was when I was working with the National Research Council. I was working with scientists. As soon as like a proposal is not an experiment, a proof of concept, you think it was an experiment, but there is no hypothesis. Pre-conclusion, this should work. It's so trivial that it's not even close to being an experiment. And then, by the way, no one does any statistics. Like, if there are no statistics, how can that be an experiment? So I can prove it that it's not happening. We just build it. We build it like software. To me, if it was wood and hammer and nails, it would look like, I don't know, a disaster. It would look like the nails are in the wrong place and would fall over. I can't even believe I get on airplanes. And as soon as they found out there was software in them, I shouldn't go on them.
All right. Well, that could be one of our burning questions or debates later. Lauren, an opening perspective on experimentation. Like it, love it. We do too much of it. We do too little. Lauren?
This is my area of expertise, so it's actually kind of hard to answer it in a sentence or two.
But she can.
So yeah, I developed a format that I think is facilitates experimentation, and I think that the most important part of it is that there's not just one hypothesis. It's like you need to be able to track a history. It needs to be, you have to have like trail marks of an idea and be able to quickly track how an idea has changed over time, and then be able to zero in on the fine grained details, while also being able to zoom out. So I've made like a really crude format for doing that.
No, I like your, I guess it's maybe a metaphor again. We're talking about trails and trail marks of an idea. I like that. That's powerful. We'll talk.
Yeah, but
more
I could talk for hours about this. So.
Well, we will talk. We won't talk for hours, but we will talk for a few more minutes. We're just getting some opening thoughts. Chuck, welcome into the room. We're talking about experimentation and the power of doing. You have any opening perspectives or biases up front that you'd love to share? Uh-oh, you may be muted. I think you're muted.
Oh, here, I'm unmuted. Yeah, I'm just getting back to the house after having to be gone all evening. So let me listen in for a few minutes and see where we're at, because I don't know yet.
Okay, no, fair enough. That's the second best answer we could have got. So we'll get the better answer later. So I think we've shared a little bit of this in terms of, do we embrace it? I think generally we do as good business executives. I'm looking at a whole group of people at me that have done some wonders in their life. So I think you've done some experimentation. The best situations for it, I think, Rob, you brought up this whole idea of how much uncertainty is involved. And if I presume if there's more levels of certainty, that maybe there's less experimentation needed. But sometimes you really need to be exact, right? Like science is an exact thing that even if you know most of the clues, you're still looking at doing it. Tolerance for failure. I find maybe one of the reasons why corporations aren't good at it is they're afraid of the results. We don't tolerate failure too well in certain organizations. It's interesting you brought up National Research Council, Rob, because I would view those as a quasi between academics and government. I'm not too sure. Maybe you guys have opinions in terms of what type of entity, academic, startups, corporates, or government, are really good at experimentation, and who are the lagging ones. And then we may get into some thoughts around the culture to appreciate experimentation. I find companies that have tried to implement Agile, if they fail, one of the biggest reasons they fail is because their culture looked at Agile, spit it up, and said, we don't like that, we won't embrace it. And so we may talk about some of that today too. Anybody want to take a stab at which types of organizations are best at this?
Give the positive affirmation to all of them in certain ways, but I will not argue if one of you guys wants to say one's better. For example, there are strengths to each one of those groups relative to experimentation. If you think about government, certainly there are parts of government that have no clue on that, any government we know. But when I think government, I think military, U.S. military, like the fighter pilots, they use the OODA loop, or if you guys are familiar with the OODA loop, the observe, orient, decide, and then act. I think that works well for parts of government that are institutions that have a vested interest in experimentation that's life and death, which sounds weird, right? It's like, I'm going to take calculated risks because I don't have a choice. In that sense, that's a strength for a part of government, where my money goes anyhow. Corporations are looking at the bottom line, so the ROI dictates just an appetite for experimentation, and that's, again, to your point, gets a little dicey if people don't have an appetite for learning that might otherwise be viewed as failure. Startups have the same desires, but they may have a whole lot lighter budget and a whole lot less tolerance for doing 10 experiments. It's like, no, pick 2, because we only have so much funds and people and time. And yet academics, they got government grants. They've got time to do this really well sometimes. And they got smart minds who don't have to relearn because they're learning as they do. So if you've got good instruction, good direction, funding, and a good controlled environment, you can have some great experimentation in an academic environment. So, and yet with every one of those areas, we could all point out the flaws. So I just look at it as not so much that one's so much farther ahead of everybody else, but that there's strengths and weaknesses to each. I'll start with that proposition and that hypothesis, and Rob, you can prove or disprove it if you like.
I like it.
The interesting thing about that way, there's government facilities that are set up specifically for testing and experimentation. So there's clearly pockets where that's the whole function. When you mention academia, I got a little meta because, the core work they do is frequently experimental, but the process, the way they do stuff is entirely not experimental. So it's kind of a question of, are you talking about, the research? Yeah, the research in the lab is experimental. The way the organization works, not at all experimental. It's so carved in stone. I was thinking also of, rather than looking at different types of parent organizations, look at this across functional roles. There are certain roles that definitely do experimentation, and what's popping in my head is all the digital marketing stuff. There's design testing, there's A/B multivariate testing of online campaigns. There's a real practice of applied experimentation in certain marketing disciplines. This is not my specialty, so I'm not going into anything more detail than that, but there's definitely awareness of the value of it, proven value in certain parts of organizations. And that probably goes across different kinds of business clients, although I would not be surprised. The folks that I know who do that kind of things work for very small specialist firms. So it may be that everybody outsources it to somebody who really thinks that way.
Very interesting. It's almost like a patchwork quilt of people that experiment or do a little bit of it, but not the whole equation. I think I remember seeing somebody, I think it was Orson Welles, maybe saying, it's interesting that so much wealth is made by the film industry, so much production gets done, yet nowhere in the film industry, at least at the time, he said, is there any place for experimentation, which I found interesting. Maybe that leads us to all the sequels that we have in our films. Not too sure. We're going to move on to just another opening perspective. Sometimes McKinsey does come up with some good stuff. And so they came up with kind of these 8 different factors in terms of, being really good at innovation, and some of the middle factors, how you discover things, how you evolve, accelerate, and scale things. They really fall into this experimentation mode. Some of the things on the bookends are probably more around, how do we dream up stuff, or how do we go about looking across an array of options or mobilizing resources. But the middle 4 ones I find to be much more around experimentation, and whether you use agile or design thinking or lean or whatever your preferred approach. And then they actually did a look at, okay, well, what innovation leaders say they do right. And it's kind of a bit of a mixed entity here, where certainly I think, there's a lot of marks given for people that can aspire, and there's a lot of marks for people that can mobilize. The stuff in between is both spotty in terms of practice, and it's spotty in terms of even the leaders telling people that they're better at it. They kind of fall a little bit further down the scale. So just kind of some interesting stuff from McKinsey there. So what are your burning questions on this topic? I had about 5 of them, but I'd love to add to the list. In media, so when people are interviewed on the mic and you're trying to get one of your government people in a gotcha moment, and there's no option to say, I don't know, we'll go and check that or experiment that. So I think that's one I had. Is complexity a friend or foe of experimentation? I can argue both sides of that. How much is too much experimentation? Can we experiment away brilliance? So some of these great ideas that we just came up in our last segment, could we put them to an experimentation test and then realize, oh my God, Rob's great AI idea is loved by no one out of the gate. Let's kill it right away. Whereas it had probably some more potential to it. And can the average person chime in on experimentation for the future? Or one of the things I really look at when I look at futures is, do I want to go to the average person and get an opinion on things? Sure, it's going to be representative, but it's that whole they want faster horses, not a car kind of thought. So those are some of my questions on experimentations. I'm going to go off camera. You guys have any burning questions, or do you want to add to the list of questions that really are, powder keg things on this topic? maybe I'll ask one of my questions then. Is there something called too much experimentation?
The frame.
I'll say there is.
Is the goal to make money? What's the goal?
At some point, you got to execute on something.
Because there's a world where, in academia, would be, I guess, the where to take it is that the pure idea is to solve for curiosity. That is the goal. I am curious. This is interesting. I will find it, or I'll find something novel to do and find it. That's it. You're done. That's the goal. So there's infinite experimentation in that construct. If the goal is to have breakfast by tomorrow morning, okay, man, not a lot of experiments required here. I got to go use the skills I have. It's by tomorrow morning. That's not a lot of time. If I'm in the woods and it's breakfast by tomorrow, what experiments? Oh, look, that's yellow. It's shiny. I should eat that.
Are you trying to solve a traveling salesman problem? You can spend infinite time trying to get to the optimum answer, which we theoretically think can't be done, or you can pick one and deliver the packages.
Those constraints are important. I agree, Nathan. The constraints that you lay out there, that's the room is like, what are we trying to do here? And then I'll tell you that, oh yeah, we need about 1 week of experimentation. That'll come up with 3 ideas, then we're done. If we know our constraints. If you don't know your constraints, I've nothing to add to the conversation at that point.
There's the notion of satisficing, which is basically recognizing when something is good enough and move ahead.
Yeah.
Which in most decision-making processes, sooner or later is necessary, or you're overtaken by events, and failure to make a decision is a decision in itself.
Yeah. How do you feel about that idea when you apply to creating education for children? Suffice. It's good enough, Nathan.
Well, there is such a thing as good enough. It doesn't mean that what we're doing is good enough.
There's 2 sides there. Okay, interesting. Yeah.
But I think that's the point, is that recognize that good enough is good enough, but that doesn't say that good enough has to be a low level.
Right.
Good enough has to be good enough where it's not good enough, which is at least fun to talk about.
I'll tell you one area where there's too much experimentation, and I will confess I was guilty of this myself. When you were a corporate person and you decide to launch your own business, there is way too much advanced experimentation. Like, you will learn things along the way, but learning what the title of your new project is going to be, or what the color of your bit, like, there are just so many things. Somebody should send corporate flight people into startup school real early and say, look, like, boil 30% of the ocean that you're trying to do, and then move. You have to move at some point. So, Gordon, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I will admit to cheating. Knowing we were talking on this topic, I looked up some quotes, and to your question about can you do too much experimentation, it brought to mind a quote I found earlier, which is from Einstein. He said, no amount of experimentation can prove me right, but a single experiment can prove me wrong. So it back to the whole idea of why are we doing this? If it's to make money, we're going to have to draw lines. We're going to have limits. And the same is true, like you were saying, Rob, on education with Nathan. At some point, you have to have a quality standard that is sufficient to what you're trying to achieve, or believed to be and or accepted to be, so that you can move on. And then if you find it wasn't, you redo. And if you find you went way over the top and overthought it, you can back off next time. And that's usually what happens with all parenting, by the way. We start out with no guidebook, no instruction, no understanding of what's supposed to happen, except all the things that went wrong with our parenting when we were children. And we overcorrect, and we treat that firstborn like, a science experiment from God that he's endowed us with, and he's going to take away our funding if we mess it up. And then by the time you get to the second or third, I'm told, because I only had one, the binky gets dropped on the ground, you pick it up, you put it in your own mouth, you lick the dirt off of it, spit it out, and you stick it back in the kid's mouth, because you learned they're not going to die from that little bit of dirt or what you just did to it. So anyhow, I think quality standards have everything to do with how much experimentation and whether it's whether you have real world limits or not. If you don't, you can experiment for fun the rest of your life, I guess.
No, I love your kid thing. I think the third child in a family gets about 10% of the experimentation weight as the first child. Like,
yeah, and 90% more freedom. It's like, oh, you want to go walk down by the pond by yourself at 3 years old? Go, you'll come back.
Which is interesting. If you take that metaphor to a company level, there might be some parallel there too, right? We faced this situation so often before. There's no experimentation, whereas the entirely new situation begs way too much of it. Not too sure. Lauren, as both a parent and as an expert on experimentation, is any of this ringing true for you?
Yeah, I mean, my conclusion on experimentation was that I thought that corporate culture was so far from the culture that you need from experimentation that I think it's just you're never going to have true innovation in a corporation. You just can't. It's not like a small change in culture. It's very big.
Yeah, they do have those gaps that we've mentioned. There's just, and it might be a little bit more Swiss cheesy than we oftentimes like to admit. I know I had pulled together this graphic. It's tough to see on screen, but I know my frustration is, despite the wealth of schools and apparent experts and master classes that are offered on our experiments and prototypes and getting into the real nitty gritty of, doing this work within the innovation space, no one, and I repeat, no one, you can go online and check, no one's done it. No one's pulled together kind of like all the different tools that you might be able to use, or at least all of them. There's some of them come up with a top 8 list or something. And so this was a kind of a graphic I'd pulled together in terms of, low fidelity experiments, high fidelity prototypes, and about, a 6x6 grid, 36 different ways to consider experimenting and testing through to a solution. So I just serve it up as a point of the fact that I did.
Do you do all these graphics? How do you come up with all of this stuff?
Donna's a genius.
How do you have the time for this?
She's yelling.
Keep talking. If you
have like 100 hours in a day? I don't understand.
I don't know. I was saying keep talking because I didn't know if it was going down the road of a compliment or if you're saying that I was like crazy and like ridiculous. But it'll end up in a book. So
what's that mean? Fine. Why not both?
Yeah, no.
Go David.
Yeah, exactly.
Was this Sean? Is this a Gray Swan Guild asset or is this a Sean asset? Just curious.
I suppose it is now. I guess I'll Creative Commons it now. So
it's got the logo on it.
I'll just,
I guess I have it. I haven't put. I think I might have. I had a Commons on this actual graphic, and I cut it off. So I guess steal it, will if you can. But it's, if you try to reproduce it, it's probably low fidelity from your computer screen.
Yeah,
but
no, you get free future proofing. Next is up at the top right. We're good.
Okay. But I think one of the frustrations is go experiment. You're like a new person working on this innovation project, and people go, well, what does that mean? Is it an A/B test? Is it we got to build some kind of smoke screen test where people almost experience the functionality of the product? I think there's very different ways to experiment. So, but I think, thank you, Lauren. All right, let's have some debates here. Let's see if we can spark something. Ethics in experiments. Can the ends sometimes justify the means? And I'll bring up 2 different things. In science, cosmetics, a whole bunch of things, we test on animals. It's great because if it's not going to work on an animal, it's certainly not probably going to work on a human. On other things, we lie to consumers. We lie to consumers in the fact that this product already exists or it's a working model, even though it's really somebody behind a curtain doing stuff. So, there's ethics. There's, how much waterfall and like, we're just going to do this versus how much experimentation. We're going to live by the results. Is it black and white, or can there be gray? Rob, you just mentioned there was no statistics involved in some software companies you work for. How much do you lean on the soft measures versus the hard measures of experimentation? Or is there for me personally, I worked in marketing, so we would always get this rating at Procter & Gamble called definitely would buy. And there were other measures too, right? You could go 2-box. It's like, well, most probably will buy and definitely will buy. I always found when you went to that larger set of characteristics, anybody that says, yeah, I think I might buy it in an experiment will never buy it in real life. And so I love people that have an intense interest on projects when you run them out. So any thoughts on some of these debates or other ones? I'll go off screen for the conversation. Any ones that get your back up against the wall?
The ethics one grabbed me, and it's the first response is the kind of the standard, well, it depends. But and then I repose the question, do the ends justify the means? Can the ends justify the means? And I think the answer is that not just any ends can justify every means. And that they're, I'm not an ethicist, but I imagine there are whole methods of how you balance what are the costs you're imposing that you need to justify. So you mentioned animal testing. It's that's an uncomfortable thing that even if you think it's justifiable, you probably don't want to go look at it. What is the value that you're delivering to society that you're going to use to justify the harm you're doing to the animals in your test lab? And that's, I think the only answer to that is to actually wrestle with those questions. And I suspect a lot of people don't, they just do it because it's just their job. But do the ends justify the means? I don't know. What are the ends? What are the means? Do these ends justify these means? Trying to save the world from nuclear terrorists, you can justify a bit more than if you're just bringing us a new shade of hair color.
I find one of the challenges, Nathan, is sometimes when you can cut around the means, you can produce some really big ends, right? Like, I mean, I would hate to understand how much learning in Nazi Germany was made on different situations where, my God, no one wants to go through those means, but I'm sure they learned something without the need to use some kind of, stand-in for a human being in terms of some of the experiments they tried.
Yeah. So generating, if you're doing science for the purpose of pursuing that endless curiosity, developing knowledge isn't enough justification for some of the things you might do.
Right.
And I think we would argue that there is no justification for some of the things they did. Doesn't matter how much you learned, that wasn't worth it.
Yep. Any other big debates in experimentation? Gordon's pondering. I never know what your ponder is. Your ponder could lead to a dead end, or it could lead to a highway of insight. I don't know.
I struck out.
How much are people really thinking about experimentation? If you're in a specialty where experimentation is the norm, somebody originated A/B testing for marketing, but once they did it, it's pretty easy to do it, figure out if it makes money. Oh, that makes money. Yeah, we'll do that. And there's no longer any bravery involved in doing it. It's just the right way to do it. How many of the people are even thinking about it, and how much is just decisions are made by somebody's gut, right? Somebody was successful 10 years ago, they got promoted, now they get to be the one that makes the decision. Is this even a question?
I think there's, in my mind, there probably is. I faced over the last 20 years of my career a much higher sensitivity around experimentation. And I'll bring up 4 things. One, just the innovation processes in companies have entirely revolved around experimentation, agile, lean. It's the whole, let's not plan something and believe we're right up front and then only learn 2 years in market that we're not right later. There's a lot of experimentation up front now. You had mentioned digital marketing. That was a profession that was probably the least experimental. Think about Don Draper and Mad Men, right? It's like, oh, there's a smart guy in a suit that just told me this is going to work, right? And whether it does or not.
I'm wasting half my money, but I can't tell which.
Totally, right?
Hey, let's go to lunch.
Now you've got an entire industry of growth hackers who all they do, forget about leaps of faith, all they do is find out, is the color blue on your website better than green on your website? And if it's 20% better, then we're going with it. I think the technology and the ability to access data, if you look at AI, and we've had a couple of discussions today, I'm looking at my middle square box of somebody that talked about AI today. There are so many decisions, machine learning and otherwise, that get made, that experimentation is core to what AI is all about. So the technology, I think, drives us there, and the risks as well, right? I'm not too sure if you've seen the stats, but company lifespans, the amount of time a person in C-suite, there's a level of, I can't just do this on a whim anymore. I don't have the wherewithal to have my CEO say yes, because he has to justify it to somebody. So those are 4 differences I've seen over the course of my career. I don't know if others have seen the same approach to experimentation. Well, I would have thought software and the ability to build SaaS products had an experimentation approach because they've adopted the same processes innovation has. But Rob, your in practice experience suggests they're probably paying lip service to it.
Well, in the business profit construct, it goes very fast and furious. And then what we've done in order to avoid doing specific scientific statistical analysis is we just put in stage gates, like we were taught after World War II. You don't just go do something that's big. You break it down into smaller chunks that you're taking less risk to less experimentation, but you have to achieve some goal before you get to the next stage gate and deploy capital. I work with a lot of people that don't understand how to budget for capital at all. They don't understand the value of money at all. So it's hard to have the discussion in short sentences with those types of people around this area. I do know that anytime I walk in a room or see someone trying to do data-driven anything, it's a lot more advanced than it's ever been. We've gone through decades, each decade, there's just a leveling up of what's possible. There are things we do now, which we use for statistics, which we used to do statistics, like crack open a logarithmic table on a piece of paper and write the number down. We don't do that anymore. No one in the West does it anymore. No one in advanced does it anymore. We built computers to do that. And then on the shoulders of that capability, we go further. So there's more experimentation than meets the eye, 1. Data-driven works, and that's all experimentation 2. Having stage gates is a way of experimenting that's a very modern approach. There are other things that we do that they're so sensitive. They're all built on hypotheses and experiments, and they are self-healing. I'm thinking of rapid trading right now, or algorithmic trading. It's so advanced. And this is kind of paradox, and I don't use the term paradox very often, in that no one understands why the profit's being made, but the algorithm is unleashed because it's making profit. That's not quite an experiment, folks, but it works.
Until it doesn't, I guess, right? And then why did we have the meltdown on the stock market? Well, let's talk about derivatives, and it takes a day to figure that one out. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to go through some lead approaches here. I know we like to share like the how of how we do things. I've shared some things from different companies here. These are not mine, Lauren, so I will credit them in the post that we do later on these. But traditional approach, which was just like, hey, I've got an idea, let's go test it, see if it works. Maybe a more experimentation approaches. We have a selection of ideas. We view it minimum investment and then see which ones pass the threshold. There is the scientific method that we all grew up in school around asking questions and building hypotheses, experimenting, see if they work, and then returning back to where it was. I loved your comment from earlier, Rob, about, hey, what are your constraints? What are your needs, right? Like, are your solutions unknown? And you're probably testing for something else, or are your solutions known? And so you're probably validating something. And so I think that the nature of testing is quite different, and the continuum. I saw this chart, which was interesting. I hadn't seen this before, but just, 2x2 matrix, are you doing quantitative testing on your experiments or qualitative? Are you doing attitudinal, or are you doing behavior? What are they doing? And as much as I love, probably in this one, I love the top left box. Oftentimes you don't have access to do some of those things at times. So it's another lead approach. Here's a funnel approach that a lot of marketers tend to use in terms of how they go about experimenting.
Marketers like it because it looks like distillation.
It does. It does look like there should be that 1950s industrial music behind this.
I was going more Dilbert. Welcome to marketing, 2 drink minimum.
Nice. Whatever spits out the bottom, right? This one was really interesting. I don't know if I buy into it, but they mentioned, look, there are core different things that are so mission critical important that we have to nail it to the nth degree. There are those things that probably carry less either risk or weight, and they're tier 1. And there are those things that, give it to somebody, have them make it make sense, or it's so downstream that even making a decision now, whether it's 70% wrong or 70% right, isn't probably going to hinder the project later on. So I just thought having this core tier 1, tier 2 approach. There was a lifespan kind of approach that was advocated here, where it kind of very much kind of design thinking-y in terms of nature. And I think last one, I didn't have the OODA one. The OODA one's a good one that you had mentioned earlier before. So I might get you to talk about that one, Gordon. But this one was just the interesting SPEED acronym, right? And it considers a lot about your biases and assumptions before you head into an experiment design and executing it, and then now analyzing it. So you want to talk about OODA for a little bit, because I know it had its roots in the military. Gordon, are you an advocate of that?
Yeah, there's a group. Boy, it's been a few years, but they call themselves Top Gun. A bunch of Air Force project management and leadership types who have retired from military and teach the OODA idea as a lean, agile model for getting things done. And the OODA loop starts with observe, and that's where you have just looking at everything around you. And of course, you're in a cockpit, right? And you've got only so many controls and gauges and instruments in front of you. And so you're going to observe what's going on around you, in particular what your partner's doing, because they're flying in formation. The next piece is orient. So as you move into different places with the things you're familiar with, you orient yourself to what's changing constantly. And then you have to decide, based on what you've observed and thought about, what's the next course of action. And then you act. And you observe how your partner reacts. And you go right back to the top, and you observe and you orient and you decide. And that whole loop in a fight or in a battle situation could be repeated like within seconds. But it's that training of going through that mental process that allows them to do the things they do at Mach 1 speed and 2 or 3 Gs, right? So I'm not an expert in that at all, but it's fascinating to me that they saw how they could apply what they learned in just flying jets to how they adapted themselves to business and how it served them well. For me, that was sort of like an advanced session on plan, do, check, act, which is another one we've all gone through. And plan, do, check, act is a little bit waterfall, a little bit slow for most of what we're doing. But certain operationalized things that need tight control, that works just fine.
Wonderful. Thanks for the rundown of that. So, I mean, certainly we may tackle it in another project in the guild, but there's many different ways to go about experimenting. Is there any, short of what the process you land on, are there any tools or tips of the trade or things, kind of heuristics in the back of your mind that you tend to apply when you do your experiments? I had mentioned one earlier, and Chuck, I think you've got your hand up. Chuck, you got some thoughts?
Yeah, well, I had a question. Now that I feel that I'm finally getting into the discussion, while I was gone or before I got here, did we talk at all about experimentation with digital twins?
Oh, wow. You're going next level here. No, we have not got to that.
Thought, and I didn't have time, and we don't have time to go into this very deeply, but ethics is kind of where I live in many things. So I've been thinking about that ethical question, and I'm not a scientist, so experimentation is not my bailiwick, but I'm thinking, at least what I'm watching is as I look at future developments, I'm watching digital twins becoming better, and I'm assuming that whatever the rate of replication is, that's going to increase until perhaps at some point we get to the point that a digital twin is virtually indistinguishable from the analog object. If that's the case, this is a question we can't answer them all, but the first question, as far as ethics goes, is if we can do the so-called hideous ends justifies the means on digital twins of actuality, does that still justify it? And I guess I would say, off the top of my head, that human experimenters are impacted by what we do and pay a certain human price. So again, even if you're doing and right now I'm just brooding about it, if you do an experiment on a digital twin, it may save the terribleness, if you will, to the actuality, and it may make it digital and not real, but still the researcher is going to pay a price, and perhaps other prices. I don't know. So right now I'm just thinking about digital twins. Does that help us in this ethical issue? I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because I guess we faced that with autonomous cars, right? And their use of digital twins. Like, do you allow yourself to kill the old lady because you can save 6 kids walking? I mean, those are some of the decisions faced in some of that work. I like your comment about the. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
For a kitten digitally and get a wonderful fragrance out of it. And I'm just being bizarre here just to make a point. No kitten is harmed. My brain is harmed. And perhaps epigenetically, I'm going to pass on things to my children I wish I hadn't. But other than that, I don't know. So I'm just thinking about that. It's not my world. Research, but ethics kind of is. And so I'm just thinking about what you guys are saying. But I am really quite interested in the whole digital twin position. Where we're going as I watch it develop. And it seems to me off the top of my head that it can play a pretty good role as far as experimentation goes. So that's kind of all I had about that.
This is really rich turf for the science fiction approach to things.
Oh yeah,
it's sounding a little bit like Blade Runner. I'm sure there's good science fiction that gets into what are the ethics of abusing artificial life that we create inside a computer or in a robot or something. Is it ethical to cause a self-driving car to crash itself to test its safety? Okay, fine, it is. You say it is now. How you also bring in, what is consciousness? We can't define it, but what if we achieve some sense of self-awareness or consciousness or something in an AI? Is it still ethical to conduct experiments on it if it knows that it's the subject of an experiment? I think this is where science fiction really shines as a method, because it lets you really explore those difficult issues without worrying about whether the technology you postulated is possible. It may be possible later if it's not possible now, but we can think about what are those effects on it. Is it an unethical effect on the technology we've created, the intelligence we may be creating? Is it unethical because of the effects on the humans involved? That's
right.
I bet so much that stuff's been dealt with, and I would really love to find the list that covers it, because I know there's more of it that's dealt with that.
And one other quick thing is we can assume that if whatever this phase 2 of this right now kind of spacious metaverse concept is, we can assume, besides playing games and the various other things we do, that it would come to a point you might want to do experimentation within a metaverse concept, and then all of this becomes very pragmatic.
Yeah, no, so much good exploration in terms of just the different options we have available to us now too, right? Yeah, no, it's this is not your 1950s experiment from your dad's era. We're trying to squeeze this underneath the hour here. I know in these sessions we oftentimes like to provide some resources. I'm showing 4 books to you. Stefan Tomke ends up being pretty prominent in this space. He's got 2 of them that are a little bit wide apart. And I'll do the last quote, because we usually end up with a last quote, and then I'll ask just to go around the room kind of popcorn style and just get your overall observations in terms of what we've talked about over the last hour. Life is trying things to see if they work. Pretty simple, but I'm a big Ray Bradbury fan. So there you go. That's our summation. But, Rob, what did we learn today in terms of experimentation?
Learned that experimentation has changed. Some good approaches and bad approaches. And it seems to me like just enough, the Goldilocks amount of experiments seems the right measure.
I like it. I like any invocation of Goldilocks. Gordon, what did we learn?
I can't improve on what Rob just said. I'm just going to say ditto. Good summary.
Awesome. Nathan?
Yeah. I'm go Rob. Also, it's 1 a.m. So others may have left the room.
I am getting a sense that if this was 11 a.m. and you're perky on your 3rd coffee, you would add even something supportive of Rob's comment.
I noticed that Louise is joining presumably for the next hour, and I'm thinking that this is probably the most reasonable time she's ever joined one of our events, which is why it's such an unreasonable time here.
No, this is the ideal time that Louise would always want our meetings to go off. I do know that. So yeah. Lauren, what did we learn today on this hour?
So I wanted to ask, but I thought I might appear really foolish, what an experiment was. And so I was kind of wondering, like, does everyone just know what an experiment is, or did you go through that in the beginning, or is like,
no,
or is that open to, like, are there many different types of experiments, or do they all work the same way?
We didn't go through it. It's not a stupid question. I think that's a great meta question to bring to anything like this, when people start with a term and an assumption that everyone knows what it means. So we skipped that. I think the stack of books at the end suggests there are answers to it, but we didn't have time for that.
Okay.
No, that's quite fair, right? I think in my own mind, it seems to play differently by discipline, right? If you're in science, it'll play different than if you're in a corporate world, and it'll play different if you're in academia or innovation. That's my way to break it down. I think others would have different ways to break it down, which is probably an hour into itself, right? Like, what are the types of experiments? We kind of focused on the how in this session. So
in this hour, there actually wasn't even time to read the 4 book titles on the slide before the slide changed. So
no, we'll be rewatching those with interest. We'll be rewatching all of it, including you'll be expanding my microfiche experiment list, so we can not have to credit future proofing, I guess. Yeah. Chuck, you came in, you came out, you came in, you came out, but you left educated. What did we learn?
I was reminded myself that I love science. I love scientists. I love the methodology. I am not a scientist. I'm more a philosopher of science. I learned experiments have many ways they can go. You listed quite a few that I will want to review, and my fascination still stays with. I wonder if we can replicate some of this digitally rather than just analog.
Very cool. That is worthy of, similar to the ArtGate stuff that was presented earlier, Rob, that truly gave me a world that I didn't know existed. I think the digital twin universe and finding a group of those people would probably introduce me to a world that would open up some eyes. So thanks for that, Chuck.
I will make a prediction, Sean, that you will send a digital twin of yourself to a meeting before you get off this planet.
Probably. I'll be probably sending it to the next 7 hours of our Day of the Swan, because this current twin, it's his light's flickering a little bit. So, but
no
anyway,
one gets out alive.
Yeah. Now the real cheat on all of this. So we should probably shut this one down. So thank you once again. Our next session is going to be on Clubhouse next Friday. We're talking about emotional intelligence, which some of us have, some of us like me maybe don't know. But we are going to be talking about it Friday, 1:00 p.m. Eastern time next week on Clubhouse. So please, for those that are listening to this video, would love to have you in our room with some of the friendly faces that you're seeing here, and certainly some others. So thank you, panel. Appreciate it. And I'll let Rob pause us and
Twill be done. Twill be done.